In the suburb of Greenville, a seemingly quiet place, there lay a dark secret that grew in the shadows of quiet streets and the whispers of forgotten alleys. It was a town where the night hid secrets of fear, guilt, and blood, while I, Morticia, death itself, silently watched the unfolding of this dark tale. Here, where the city lights barely touched the ground, the true nature of people was revealed, their darkest secrets, their souls cloaked in thick shadows. It was a cold October night when Sarah Matthews, a young recent graduate, returned from university to her parents' home, tired but happy to be back. Sarah was the kind of person who brought light wherever she went. Her gentle smile and willingness to help others were known by all. Yet that night, as she stepped into the room that was once hers, something bothered her, an uneasy feeling she couldn't explain. When Jack Matthews, Sarah's older brother, entered the room to greet her, he noticed the tension in her eyes. He laughed, trying to ease the mood. "Are you going to tell me you're still afraid of the old wardrobe, Sarah?" But she only forced a smile, looking away, as if something invisible was watching her. Their father, Roger Matthews, was a reserved man, with a gray beard and eyes hard as stone. Roger had worked as a policeman for almost 3 decades and knew, better than anyone, that evil could hide where least expected. He had always been a man of few words and long stares. But in recent days, even Roger seemed troubled, as if an invisible burden was pressing down on him. He spent long minutes in silence, staring into the void, as if reliving something only he knew. Sarah, trying to understand the reason for this strange tension hanging over the house, approached her mother, Evelyn Matthews, a woman with a delicate appearance and fragile soul, like a leaf ready to break at the slightest touch. Evelyn had always been a loving and protective mother, but there was something in her gaze that night, a shadow of guilt or pain that Sarah had never seen before. Feeling uneasy, Sarah tried to start a conversation. "Mom, is everything okay? Everyone seems so distant." Evelyn sighed, hesitating, as if weighing what she could or could not tell her daughter. "Oh dear, there are things you may never understand about this town." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean by that? What secrets does this town have that I don't know?" But Evelyn just looked away, and Sarah realized there would be no answers that night. The unease in her heart grew, a dark shadow whispering secrets of the past, an echo of something ancient and painful. This was a close-knit family, but there were invisible cracks, marks of an untold story that seemed to envelop them all. That same night, across town, Michael Dawkins, a detective newly transferred to Greenville, was going through the files of an old, unsolved case that haunted him. It was the case of a serial killer who had operated in Greenville over a decade ago and had never been caught. 5 victims, all young women, all disappeared under mysterious circumstances and were found days later, in different places around town, with a pattern of mutilation that left a horrible, unmistakable signature. Michael, driven, had a look of exhaustion and determination. He knew Greenville's reputation and the rumors that some crimes never got solved. Something in the town's atmosphere seemed to nurture evil, but Michael was not one to give up. He reviewed the files, looked at old photos, read statements, but everything seemed shrouded in an impenetrable fog. One of those victims, he learned during his investigations, had been a close friend of Evelyn Matthews. This fact intrigued him deeply, as Evelyn, even when called to testify, had been reticent, almost as if she had something to hide. Michael decided then to dig deeper. He knew that a small town like Greenville held secrets, but he never imagined what he was about to uncover. At dawn, Michael went to the Matthews house, determined to speak with Evelyn. She received him reluctantly, but, feeling pressured, she ended up revealing fragments of a bitter truth. "We were very close friends. Laura was like a sister to me. And when she disappeared, I knew something terrible had happened. But I never imagined, never, that she would end up like that." Michael pressed her to know more. "Evelyn, you know who did this, don't you?" She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes, but said nothing. A name hovered in her mind, a face she would rather never see again. Michael realized that, in that silence, Evelyn was hiding something deep, a secret capable of destroying her family's peace forever. Meanwhile, at the local high school, Charlotte Gray, a young teacher newly arrived in town, began hearing rumors about the old legends and mysteries surrounding Greenville. Her students, especially the more curious teenagers, told chilling stories about the killer who was never caught, the disappearances of young people, and a curse that loomed over the town. One of the students, Jeremy Fields, a boy with a restless gaze and a mouth always ready for challenges, asked during class, "Miss, do you think there's still a killer loose in town?" Charlotte, sensing the suspense, tried to stay calm and replied, I believe that many things aren't what they seem. But don't you all think we've had enough of scary stories?" The students laughed, but deep down, they knew her words were just a way to push away the fear they all felt. And Jeremy, with an intrigued look, muttered to himself, "Well, I believe the killer is still among us." That same afternoon, Jack Matthews, Sarah's brother, went out to meet some friends at a bar. Jack had always been a carefree young man, but like any young person in Greenville, he knew that certain places and stories were best left alone. However, the alcohol had loosened his tongue, and he began to talk more than he should. "We all know there's someone in this damn place hiding secrets," Jack told his friends, eyes narrowed in anger and bitterness. "My father, he's never talked about it, but I know he's hiding something. Something that's haunted him since that case." Harry, a childhood friend of Jack, looked at him curious. "But what case, Jack? What are you talking about?" "The missing girls. The 5 who?" "Well, you know what I mean," Jack replied, now visibly uncomfortable. The shadow of his father, Roger, seemed to weigh on him in a way no one, not even he, could fully understand. When he returned home that night, he found his father, Roger, sitting in the living room, in deep silence, as if waiting for someone or something. Jack hesitated, but decided to confront him. "Dad, why don't you ever talk about it?" "About the girls?" Roger raised his eyes slowly, his face hard, without a trace of emotion. "Because they're ghosts, Jack. And ghosts don't need to be remembered." But Jack couldn't hold back. What if those ghosts are still haunting the people of this town? What if the killer is still out there? Roger took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on Jack with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "If he is, do you think you're ready to face him?" Jack remained silent, the question echoing in his mind as he went up to his room, where sleep now seemed impossible. Doubt and fear had taken root in his heart, like the roots of a dark tree. The tension in Greenville was rising. Detective Michael continued his investigation, pressing people, unearthing old secrets, and rekindling fears that had been lying dormant. Roger, on the other hand, grew increasingly disturbed, trying to protect his family and keep hidden the dark truths he knew. Charlotte, the young teacher, saw fear growing among her students, who talked more and more about the legend of the killer. And Jack, haunted by his father's secrets, felt compelled to seek answers, unaware that he might be diving straight into darkness. Finally, on a cold night, the sound of sirens cut through the Greenville air. Another body had been found, and panic spread through the town like wildfire. Fear had returned, and the people felt that the past had never really left. That stifling night, silence thickened in the corridors of the Matthews house, as if the very structure held secrets buried beneath layers of dust and old lies. Roger, seated in the darkened leather armchair, stared at the shadows dancing across the room, cast by the flickering firelight. His expression was that of a tired man, corroded by an invisible weight that seemed to dig into his soul. He knew that the past, like a wounded beast, was about to burst forth from the darkness and devour everything around it. Across the room, Sarah watched her father, her eyes filled with doubt and an unease that boiled inside her chest. She felt that something deep and hideous connected her family to those disappearances, a web of horrors that somehow ensnared her as well. Jack, on the other hand, leaned against the wall, arms crossed and gazed distant. The mask of disdain he wore constantly seemed ready to shatter. He knew, too, although he had never admitted it, not even to himself, that the laughs and the indifference were just a front. Deep down, there was something in Roger, something sinister and heavy that loomed over them like a curse. That night, Detective Michael Dawkins knocked on the Matthews door. His eyes held the intensity of someone who had finally found the secret he had been chasing for years. Roger looked at him, expressionless, but deep in his eyes there was a spark of despair. He knew he could no longer run. The deaths of the young women he had kept locked away in the recesses of his mind were now embodied in the form of a man determined to drag the truth out. "Roger, it's time to tell the truth. The shadow of the past has returned, and only you can unravel this web," Michael said, his voice firm and unyielding. Sarah looked from Michael to her father, her heart racing, her lips parted in a silent whisper. It was as if her entire reality was collapsing around her. Jack stepped forward, his gaze fixed on his father, a mixture of anger and confusion boiling over. "Dad, what does he mean by this? Do you know about the girls? Do you know what happened to them?" Roger lowered his head. The weight of decades seemed to press down on his shoulders, bending his posture and making him appear older and more fragile than ever before. He turned to Evelyn, who was now pale, her hands trembling over her mouth, then looked at his children, his tired, aged eyes hiding a truth he was finally ready to reveal. That night, The first night one of the girls disappeared, I knew. I knew because, he swallowed hard, his eyes seeming lost in a dark abyss. I was responsible. I let it happen. Sarah felt as though the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. She felt the burn of tears in her eyes, and a quiet fury overtook her. You let it happen? How, why? Roger looked at his daughter, his voice barely a whisper. I was involved in something bigger. It wasn't just a job. The city demanded sacrifices. I believed that I needed to do something terrible to keep them safe. But every time a young woman disappeared, a part of me died with them. Michael stared at him with disgust and disbelief. So you protected a killer in the name of a peace that never existed? Roger nodded, a solitary tear running down his face. It was someone I knew, someone I never imagined capable of such evil. But when I realized, it was too late. At that moment, a cold presence filled the room. I, Morticia, felt the anxiety, the fear, and the lives intertwined within that house. I knew my time was near. Suddenly, the door creaked, and a muffled sound made everyone turn. Jack, who had until then maintained a mask of indifference, was wide-eyed, staring at the figure that had appeared in the doorway. It was Harry, Jack's friend, with a sinister smile and an empty stare. Harry let out a low laugh, almost a murmur. Seems like secrets are more fun when shared, huh, Jack? Sarah instinctively stepped back, her heart racing, while Michael gripped the holster of his gun. Harry, what are you doing here? Michael asked. Harry raised his hands with a chilling smile. Oh, I just came to say goodbye to my friends. He pulled a knife from his pocket, and in the blink of an eye, lunged at Jack. The blade's gleam found Jack's chest before anyone could react. Roger screamed and tried to hold Harry, while Michael drew his gun, but Harry had already finished the job and was slipping out the back door, disappearing into the shadows. Jack fell to the ground, his gaze dazed, as blood spread in a growing pool. Sarah rushed to him, cradling him in her arms, tears streaming down her face. No! Jack, please stay with me. I, Morticia, felt his last breath fade, and I approached. Death knows no regret, but in that moment, I felt something like a flicker of compassion. Jack's heart stopped with its final beats, and I took him in, easing his wounded soul. With her brother dead in her arms, Sarah looked at her father, now with hatred in her eyes. You caused this. Your greed, your secrets, your lies. This is all your fault. Roger simply nodded, his face marked by remorse, but he knew his words would be useless. As the night took Jack's final breath, I watched them in silence. I knew the shadows of Greenville still held deep secrets, but that truth was already etched into those who remained.